The mill, which was painted in 1947. It was the last painting that Beckmann did, and it was in Amsterdam that he painted it. And at that point, he was coming to the United States. And to backtrack a little bit, there's an association with the mill with his father. And he grew up in Leipzig, or he was born in Leipzig. And it may be his father had some association with the mill. So I found that was all the information I could get about that. But that's somehow, for me, that kind of reverberated with the title. But the really important thing was that as a very young painter, he received a lot of honors. You know, he was in really important exhibits in Germany and, you know, really flourishing as a painter. Hitler came to power. You remember there's that big degenerative art exhibit where the Nazis, you know, corralled a whole number of artists and said this work is, can't be shown, it's terrible. I mean, there were suicides from that. There were a huge number of paintings that were destroyed by various artists. I mean, really caused tremendous consternation and pain. Beckmann went, at that point, you see, from being very highly revered to just zip, you know, because he was in that exhibit. He was one of the many people in that exhibit. And he and his wife moved to Amsterdam. And so they kind of, you know, they got out, really out of Germany, at least at that point. And you have to remember that when he came here, he was like 65 about when he arrived in the States. So you're seeing somebody that was really from, you know, very revered in Germany to way down, and then suddenly being kind of pulled back up. And he was teaching, you know, in Brooklyn, I think, for quite a number of years. So that's kind of background on it. And the connective tissue with Boston Museum and myself and my husband was that we were there, and at the time in the 60s, the Germans were really a big deal. You know, there was a major retrospective of Beckmann's work in the 60s there. What was interesting to me in formal terms with this painting was just the whole issue of black and how black is used. And I feel when I'm looking at this painting, like I'm seeing almost like 4 paintings in one painting. And when I say that, it's just that the formal concerns here, because it's almost a square, it's like he just compressed maybe all of the things that were going on for him in one painting before he was leaving. And so I always kind of would consider kind of his state of mind at the point he's leaving. One of the things I think that's very interesting here is look at the enormous length of that arm. The arm is really, you know, kind of pleating, maybe going up, you know, and it really hits the whole top of that edge, and then you're kind of brought down. And her profile is certainly somewhat classical. You know, the nose is kind of almost coming out of the hair, and it kind of, there's some Greek statues that you would immediately begin to kind of look at. Some things really even with Picasso, maybe later, where you'll see that kind of profile. With the figures kind of tied to kind of blades, there's a big X feeling there, and then you have an Xing actually of the arm. So there's a kind of double cross thing there that he's handling, as well as that very, very strong, that diagonal, and then you go up to what is kind of, I think maybe the back of the mill, but it also, whenever I'm looking at this, I'm also sort of almost reading it as a mask or a face a little bit. There's something about the peak there, almost like you could be seeing a nose or something, you know. So there are a lot of interpretive things I think that happen kind of when you're looking at it. The other thing is that we have the painter himself here with his hands bound and tied. The foot is really coming kind of right across his mouth, which I find kind of interesting. there's so much narration in this one painting that the stories and some of what you might think about it, it's just very compacted, and the formal elements really help you kind of push all this stuff together. So we're moving to 1988, okay? I had quite a number of things that I'm kind of picking up both from the Beckmann and then with Bob's painting. First of all, like the use of black in this painting is, really quite entirely different. I thought it was a very interesting contrast with the Beckmann, how the Beckmann's painted, how that black is used in the Beckmann, and how the paint in the Beckmann is kind of fudged. Like the lines are not often very precise and they're not very crisp. There'll be a kind of edge to it that's completely different. In this painting, you've got a big mass of color kind of coming in. But the dynamic on it, the diagonal, and the association that Bob and I both had with Beckmann and the number of Beckmanns we used to see in Boston and in New York, I'm sure that there was some real connection there. This one was what I thought was both exuberant and kind of meaty, and the paint, that black has been pulled over a much different ground. He had some other paintings where it was very thin and much airier and kind of a completely different thinking process on it. It's very grounded with these two kind of circular forms at the bottom, but there's a lot of painting and then overpainting in this. But the delicacy of the line, some of what's happening in here on a larger scale, actually I began to realize, like with the drawings at the end of his life, the drawings are not very large in most cases. I mean, the biggest ones were about 22-30, but the smaller ones have a lot of very delicate mark. And it's kind of, I thought that was kind of interesting to see suddenly all of this just kind of playing around with the brush, and that's exactly what he was doing with his drawing. We used to have a lot of conversations about color and how things were kind of working. And he did make a remark once about yellow makes red honest, which I told him, and he said, "Did I say that?" And I said, "Yeah, you did," because I really had remembered it. So there's something about that whole ochre to the red, which kind of flips around, when I even took a photo of it, it turns quite pink, but it's actually not as pink as that. I think of this painting as being both kind of exuberant and with a name like Corinthian tilt, there's a kind of classical idea in that, and he did a lot of writing, and there was a lot of pickup on Ovid and a lot of Greek myth that he was really interested in.